So, Charlie, thank you so much. The first question I want to ask you is about your experience of Bilderberg in Vouliagmeni. You have been arrested several times, and can you share with us your experience and what did you felt during these 3 days?
Sure. Okay, so that was Bilderberg 2009, and I turned up. I wasn't even sure it was going to be happening in Vouliagmeni. I mean, there was a few postings on a few internet sites, and that was really the only information there was. So I got on a plane, turned up at this place, and thought, "Is it happening here?" And then all of the limousines and the helicopters started arriving, and I went, "Okay, something's happening." And the police were quite prevalent. There were police everywhere, special forces people, people in plain clothes. A kind of mix of everyone, you could tell, and it was quite intimidating. Mainly because there was very few people from the press there at all. Just a handful. So yes, and the police were quite heavy-handed in Vouliagmeni, certainly by comparison with the following year. But I found myself seeing a lot of the inside of Greek police stations for the next 5 days, which I really wasn't expecting. I turned up just thinking I might write a couple of light-hearted pieces about a secret meeting that was going on, and the next thing I knew, my life had turned into something out of Enemy of the State or the Parallax View or something, and I was fleeing Vouliagmeni into Athens and then wrestling with a man in an Athens underground station and jumping in a taxi and saying, "Take me to the British Embassy," and finding out that on a Sunday the British Embassy is shut, which was one of the most disappointing moments of my life, of which there have been many. Yes, it was quite an experience. I went there with, I guess, an open mind and left with a broken spirit. In 2009 there were very few people covering the Bilderberg conference, and I was probably the only member of what you'd call the mainstream media. Although I was really, I was writing for the Guardian newspaper's website, so I was pretty low down on the rungs of mainstream media, but I was, I guess, a representative of the press, and I think that the fact that there were so few people there meant that the pressure upon the people there from the police and from the security forces was very focused, and I found myself on the first day. I went out of my hotel, walked down the road, and I realised I was being followed in a kind of, this can't be happening, can it? And so I turned a corner, and a couple of guys turned the corner after me, and I thought, this is ridiculous. So I went into a cafe and came out the other door of the cafe behind them and sort of looked at them, and they were still went, "Oh, hang on, was he gone?" And I started being followed by the police. Well, I didn't know who they were at first. Some men were following me around Vouliagmeni, and for about a day it was good fun. It was great. What's more fun than being followed but around? It was great. Hiding behind trees, waving at them, taking photographs of them as they sort of get a bit confused. Where is he? Oh, there he is. And so for a day it was fun. Then it became pretty awful quite quickly as I started getting arrested, and I turned up at the gates of the hotel where the conference was hasn't even got underway. I think I was there a couple of days early, and I took a photograph out to sea opposite the gates of the hotel of a nice picture of a fishing boat. The next thing I knew, I was whisked off to a Greek jail and was being questioned, and I was sitting in a chair much like this, surrounded by uniformed Greek policemen shouting at me, "Give me your camera, give me the footage from your camera." And I'm thinking, what, a picture of a fishing boat, you really want that? And I didn't give it to them. I don't know why, really. I just felt annoyed, I think. And anyway, the pressure upon me became greater and greater. And I ended up leaving Vouliagmeni, I was arrested so many times that it got to the point where I was going, this isn't any fun anymore. I'm not even getting any, I'm not even able to write about Bilderberg, I'm just being harassed here. So I decided to leave town, and I packed up my stuff, I stood on the side of the road to hail a cab. Instead of a cab coming along, the police cars come along, arrest me, not quite sure what for, took me back down to the station, and eventually I managed to get out of Vouliagmeni, got in a cab, went the 25 kilometres or whatever it is to Athens, got out of the cab, turned around, and there's two guys on motorbikes that had followed me to Athens. And then my life really started falling apart, because I was on my own in Athens, followed everywhere by, at times I could see it was between 8 and 10 people always around me. And this sounds paranoid, I know, but it really was happening. And I started trying to find out who was following me. And I thought, this is absurd. What's going on? I'm really not doing anything. I managed to take a photograph of, one limousine from it with a tiny little digital camera. That was enough to get me arrested. Now I've fled to Athens, and I'm not doing anything at all. I'm not even near the Bilderberg conference, but the pressure upon me got more and more. And I started working my way up the police, going into bigger and bigger police stations, saying, can I speak to the most senior person I could? I told them what the situation was, I'm being followed. And some they were, generally speaking, the Athens police were very nice, and they were saying, okay, we don't know who's following you. I said, is it you? Is it the police? They said, no. They said, we think it's the private security of one of the Bilderberg delegates, which is more scary. I'd sooner be followed, I think, by the Greek police than by I don't know, xe.com, or whoever's being Blackwater, or whoever's being hired by, the head of Fiat, or whatever. Anyway, I'm in Athens, I go to one police station and I say, look, I'm being followed, what do I do? Can you help me here? And they said, okay, the next time this happens, call the police. So I wake up in the morning, come out of my hotel, there's the two, I was getting good at spotting them by now, two guys sort of lounging over there. I walk up some side roads, they follow me up a side road, I come towards an Athens Underground station, they follow me around, I come back round the corner and I grab one of the blokes and I say, okay. And I start making a fuss. I say, call the police. I'm shouting, call the police. And he's going, what the hell's going on? And I'm on the phone to the police saying, I need your help. I'm being followed by this guy. I think he's threatening me. He rushes off down into the, wrestling with me. People are coming around. We go down into the the Athens Underground. We go down into the metro station. I'm going to say that again because I'm such an idiot. I say London. So there I am. I try and make a citizen's arrest. A guy is harassing me. I follow him around the corner, grab him, and I phone the police and say, I'm being followed by this guy. He's threatening me. I'm shouting at people. Can you help me? Can you help me? Call the police. And there's a real kerfuffle around me. The guy goes down into the underground station. I follow him down, I'm holding him. We're tussling in this, my life has gone pretty mental at this point. I'm having a fight with a guy in a Athens Underground station. Anyway, his partner turns up, this other guy, and literally grab me, take me into this police station, this transport police unit. And I'm trying to arrest him. They end up trying to arrest me. No one knows what's going on. The partner of the guy that I grabbed was the most angry I've ever seen anyone, I think. Anyway, I still can't find out who these people are. Even at this point, I say, what's going on? And no one will tell me. No one will tell me who the guys are. Eventually, I get an appointment with the head of the central police station in Athens. I get an appointment with a guy who's pretty high up in their police force. And I say, okay, I'm being followed by these guys. I've been followed around Vouliagmeni. I'm being followed around Athens. I'm having to jump into cabs and shouting, take me to the British Embassy. I'm at my wit's end, and my mind was being really frazzled by the experience. And he said, no, I don't know who this is. I don't know who's following you. I'm sorry. We cannot help. So I say, okay, fine. And I reached a dead end, and I go to the loo. I say, can I go to the loo? He goes, yeah, go to the loo. And I go to the loo, and I look up, and standing next to me in the urinals is one of the guys that's been following me around Athens. a guy I've been hiding from around in stairwells, and whilst he sort of prowls around outside looking for me. And we look at each other, and there's this kind of freaky moment of what, whoop, who? And he runs off out of the lavatory, runs like a child, runs out of the lavatory and hides in an office. And I'm shouting, I'm in the 6th floor of the Athens Central Police Station, shouting at the top of my voice, going, here's the guy who has been following me, right? At which point I get ushered into another room, I get taken up another layer to like the big guy who's in charge of it turns out he's in charge of the kind of, the department of the Greek police that look after their dignitaries and their politicians. So they're kind of, they're sort of, I don't know, MI5 of Athens, or whatever you call them. And I say, look, I've been followed around, I've been harassed, and I finally found out who's following me. You're following me. Your men are following me around. I just saw this guy in your lavatory, and he's been one of the guys that's been following me around Athens. And this big guy, looks at me and goes, you didn't see anyone. And I went, what? He says, you didn't see anyone just now. And that's when my mind was sort of just falling out of my ears, where I realised that I'm in one of those moments where I'm not in any way in control of the situation. I'm way out of my depth. And the guy's just telling me, no, you're imagining things. So yeah, at that point I go, okay, thank you very much for your time. And I sort of walk out of the office, and that's when I was the most scared. And I just thought, what on earth am I into here? So I got in a cab, filed my last report from Vouliagmeni, from Greece, to The Guardian, in which I wrote about how I'd found out who was following me and who was harassing me, and I got on a plane and came home. But I was shattered by the experience. It was a totally awful, horrible thing. And yeah, thank God 2010 in Spain was so much nicer and didn't involve any near mental breakdowns on my part. So yeah, that was good. The thing that annoyed me most about one of my many arrests in Vouliagmeni was, at one point I was standing 300 metres away from the gate of the hotel, standing next to a couple of policemen, and with my little digital camera I just put it on the floor, and I thought I'll get some arty photographs of the limousine wheels as the parade of limos shoots up the hill into the conference. So I thought, oh, this is nice, a bit of sunlight on some alloy Mercedes wheels. Take a couple of photographs, standing next to some policemen. And just after a couple of photographs, literally police cars hurtle in front of me, sirens, men on motorbikes, and I'm going, oh no, I was just literally laughing at that point, going, you're going to pull me in for this, for taking photographs of some wheels? So that's the level of paranoia that I was up against. And I suddenly realised that I wasn't the paranoid one. I'd come into contact with a massively paranoid organisation, and the fear was theirs, and I was this thing that had made them afraid, and I was nothing. I was a guy writing some light-hearted, posts on the Guardian website, but I was clearly a threat to them, and I felt furious that I'd been made to feel afraid and made to feel paranoid. And it took me a while to process what had happened and to understand that I shouldn't be, I shouldn't feel bad. I should just feel sorry for them for feeling as scared as they clearly are of any journalist, no matter how small or big, who dares to shine the light of publicity on them. They don't like the light.
What's your impression about the 2010 meeting and the difference between Greece and Spain?
So after 2009, you could probably count the number of people who were there covering Bilderberg in whatever capacity on the fingers of two hands, let's say. There are a few bloggers here, a couple of documentary makers, yourself included. There were, not that I met you there, I was too busy being arrested. Yes, there were very few people covering Bilderberg 2009, and the amount of press attention was close to zero. It was remarkable, and I think that's one of the things that that blew my mind was turning up at this thing which was enormous. You could see the power, you could feel the power, you could see the money that was spent on it. You could see the Greek navy patrolling off the shore. You could see the helicopters circling about. You could see the machine guns, the limousines, more limousines I'd ever seen in my life. And I couldn't square that fact and what I was seeing with how little attention was being given to this thing. And I found it really baffling, and I wrote about it, and I wrote about my experiences there, and I came back the next year determined that this weird imbalance between the fact of what happens there and the strange absence of media attention could be somehow resolved and maybe get a bit more of the attention that is only due something of this importance. I mean, it's bizarre that something that big should be held with that little attention given to it. It still staggers me. And fortunately, in 2010, and I think this probably was partly to do with it being in Spain, and the Spanish they were more on it. They were more organised, they were more interested. In 2010, it was being talked about. You didn't feel like quite such a lunatic just even mentioning its existence. Some of the broadsheet papers in Britain ran articles that were quite normal about it, simply reporting it, simply talking about it. Then they would say, speculation on what actually happens behind the closed doors. But, fine, speculate away. At least they were reporting on its existence. And I did some radio interviews with with BBC World Service and Radio 4, and I found myself being treated normally and being treated fairly and not being ridiculed for simply talking about the fact that I'm there watching this thing from a distance, albeit, watching this thing unfold. So the attitude seemed to have changed. I don't know what had caused it, but it was a better feel, a better vibe in it all round.
When did you learn about Bilderberg existence, and what was your first feeling about it?
Right. Well, I had no real knowledge of Bilderberg before a couple of months before 2009 meeting, so early 2009. I think I was aware of it in the background of my consciousness as a thing. I probably could have told you it's a meeting of important people, at most. I didn't really know about it not being talked about, even. I didn't know anything about it. But I started, to be quite honest, my wife got me into it. But she was sort of nudging me, saying, maybe you should take a look at this thing over here. And I go, yeah, what is it? And a secret meeting? What secret meeting? And it's hard to take it that seriously at first. And you go, okay, well, let's find out about it. And then as soon as you try and find out about it at all, you realise there's something odd about it, because it doesn't square the importance of it and the amount of press attention given to it. The two things don't square, and I found that intriguing. And so, kind of just on a bit of a punt, I just thought, okay, I'll just go and see what happens. I'll have 5 days in Greece. It'll be nice. It's what is it, May in Greece? Lovely. Might get a bit of a tan. That was my plan. Go and make some jokes and get some sun.
What is the most important thing you learned through your experience with Bilderberg? Is that changed something in your understanding of the world, of the way politics and business are doing, etc.?
Yeah. What have I? Gosh. It's one of the things I've learned, and I think you can sort of only learn it by going there, is seeing something of that size in the flesh. When it's not on a screen, you're not It's not through the filter of any movie or anything. You're there looking at the helicopters, looking at the armed police, the machine guns, the limousine after limousine after limousine, and it makes you go, okay, right, this is real. And the very first lesson I learned in 2009 was simply, oh yeah, it's happening. This is actually happening. Which is actually a lesson that people need to have. They need to understand at the very, very lowest level that this is an important thing that's happening. And something interesting, I think, that I learned is that the way that Bilderberg handles itself, which is very, very professional, it's a massive operation. And I learned this from lingering in the hotel in Spain this year. We were the last guests out, and we could see the conference taking shape. We could see the lanyards laid out on the tables. And you could see the very, very large conference team. Never mind the security, which was immense, but there was a very significant conference team. And you looked at that, and you looked at the list of the people coming, and then you look at I guess you'd call them press releases from Bilderberg. The message that comes out of people that are associated with the group, people like David Frum, the speechwriter, President Bush's speechwriter, and attendee himself, I think. He wrote this piece during the 2010 conference about how it's just basically some old guys playing a bit of golf. The wives aren't here, so they have a bit of fun, maybe have a few drinks, talk about the old times, the good old days. These guys are past it. And you read that and you go, well, that isn't what's happening. That is not the case. That is not the truth. That is just a lie. That is a piece of disinformation that's been put out there. And then you go, well, why? Why is he writing this? What exactly is the point of lying? I mean, there's a story, isn't there, that Tony Blair lied to Parliament about attending. And there seems to be a fair amount of evidence to suggest that he did attend. And then you have to go, why is he lying? Why is he lying? What on earth reason would possess him to do such a major thing as lie about that? I mean, why when the delegates are coming up, do they hide their faces behind the Financial Times? Why aren't they going, yeah, I'm attending this meeting. We're gonna sort out the world's problems, which is one of the lines that you get told about it. And I think that one of the things I learned is that the story of Bilderberg, as it's generally put out and fed into the media from sources close to Bilderberg, I guess you'd call them, and the actual fact of Bilderberg and what you can see and what you can understand, without even speculating, simply looking at the list of names, understanding that it's a 4-day conference, understanding the size and magnitude and seriousness of it. I think the seriousness of this thing. That's, I guess you'd call it cognitive dissonance. They don't match up, and you have to decide what's true, and you have to start thinking about things, because it's a question. Bilderberg turns into a question in your mind. It goes, it makes you go, I don't understand. This does not make sense. So then you try and make sense of it. And then the scary stuff starts. My wife and I decided to check ourselves into the Bilderberg Conference Hotel a couple of days early, before the conference started. And in fact, we managed to get up right until the day before it started. So we were there on the night before the guests arrived, the delegates. And we were fortunate enough to find a table at dinner next to the conference organisers. And I admit, we did a little bit of earwigging. We overheard a few things. And what was fascinating about it was the attitude of the people inside the Bilderberg organisation, not the delegates, I'm talking about the organisers, their attitude towards anyone that would be outside holding a placard, outside, saying whatever, trying to draw attention to this thing, shouting, pointing, saying, look, I can see you in there, or whatever, Alex Jones on his bullhorn, all of that kind of thing. And the attitude they had was absolute fear. It was paranoid. They were going, oh my God, do you remember that year when they got right up to the gates, and the other one went, oh my God, what was it like? And I'm not exaggerating here. It was this level of fear, and they were going, what was it like? And the woman asked, did they attack? And I was thinking, what are you talking about? What are you? Their perception from within this organisation of the outside was as warped as the perception of the world that the world has of Bilderberg. Everything's out of whack. And I guess this is what happens when you try and keep the lid on something like this, and you try and make a thing secret. Everything gets confused. And they were as confused and fearful as you could imagine. And what the hell did they say? I remember now we were listening. Oh yeah, that's right. I reported this at the time, but one of them sort of sat there listening to this and went, well, listen to the stories of the people almost attacking, and he went, well, this is the negative side of the welfare state, and I don't quite know what that meant, except I think the idea that anyone might have the time in their life and the money to be able to protest against something, I think they found that threatening and annoying, because why do we all work 5 days a week? Why do we all have enormous mortgages and overdrafts? It's to stop us thinking about things like Bilderberg. It's to stop us thinking about things. We're too tired. This is different. Look at me. I'm knackered now. I've just finished a day's work. The last thing I want to do is think about who rules the world. But probably the biggest thing I learned from being at the hotel was how big and serious the conference is. And I probably didn't realise that myself, that it's a conference. We talk about, the Bilderberg conference. It's a conference. They have lanyards, they have meetings, they have speakers, they have an agenda. And it's not an excuse to play beach volleyball or chew the fat. They're talking serious stuff. And and then the next question is, well, aren't they just trying to sort out the world? The world's going to heck in a handcart. We need people like this, pulling together in our interests. And then you look at the list of people and you think, do you know what? I don't know whether the heads of banks and necessarily I don't think their bottom line is my interest. And then you start asking more questions.
Why the press do not talk about it, in your opinion?
Well, Bilderberg has a kind of mystique that is very clever. There's a very clever mystique, which is that if you talk about it at all, you get tarnished with the idea that you're wearing a tin hat, you're a little bit out there, you're a bit of a nutter, whatever. Come on, let's talk about the real world. Forget all this fantasy stuff. What do you mean? What, a group of people who rule the world, with their plans for world domination? What is it? One world government? Oh, shut up. Let's talk about some real things. And so if you, even mentioning the word can be problematic. And the media is really just a reflection of the kind of our general consciousness at that level, which is that the media is quite keen to sort of look at the outsider and sneer, and anyone that would suggest this kind of thing, they're a bit nuts, because it's the easiest thing to say, the absolute easiest playground bully kind of thing to say about anyone who says anything different is, you're nuts, you're an outsider, what are you talking about? Oh, shut up. Well, and I think there's an element of that in the media, and I think that the only way that we have managed to get, anyone that's ever said anything about Bilderberg has managed to get past that, and I think we have, is this kind of war of attrition. It's simply saying, no, really, okay, it's just, there it is, just without even speculating, just say, there it is, here are some facts, here's the list of people, here's the amount that they've spent on security, 10 million euros, which was the number being bandied about in Spain. Just listing things and saying again and again, at the very bottom line, Bilderberg exists, then you kind of break down that sneering, and you break down that preconception that's so fixed in people's minds that if you talk about something like that, you're a nutcase. And the great thing about Spain 2010 was that the people who came along were so normal. It was amazing. It was like you looked around and it was just a bunch of really nice, normal people. Young guys, lots of students, people from We Are Change, that organisation, and from all around the world, Belgium, We Are Change, Switzerland, some people who'd just come from, a guy from Nottingham who was worked on a radio station there. But really normal people. And what they did actually is you got a lot of young people, young bloggers, interviewing each other and then putting that footage up online. And what that did is it reflected how normal they were. They weren't finding out any great pieces of information, although one of them did. One of them managed to creep up and take some amazing photographs of the delegates. But what they did do was reflect how normal they were. And so people, their peers were able to look at that online and go, okay, yeah, there's just some people like me, some people like you. They're quite normal. So maybe they're not nuts. Maybe I can think about this thing. Maybe I can start talking about it and asking some questions. One of the ideas that surrounds Bilderberg is that there's a media blackout, and that Bilderberg has sort of crushed the media's ability to speak about it by, because there are some owners of big media corporations there, someone from the BBC, the Financial Times, whatever, and they kind of stop the story. And I think there's an element of truth to that. But what's interesting that I found is that it's not the whole truth. And any big media organisation is uncontrollable after a certain size. You can't have a three-line whip on what they should and shouldn't say, because I talked to the Today programme on the Radio 4 or to BBC World Service, and they're kind of like entities within a bigger entity, and there's no such thing as a control over the whole BBC, for example, or the whole Guardian. I was writing for the Guardian website. You couldn't say that the Guardian was shut down on Bilderberg. So there's freedom to come up from below within media organisations like that. On the other hand, I did have a little bit of... I felt the kind of brush of the wing of Bilderberg's power when talking to the BBC TV News, the forward planning desk for BBC News. And I said, there's this meeting's happening in Spain. I wondered if you were thinking of talking about it. So-and-so's going, it's a big thing. And they went, oh, sounds very interesting. Yeah, very interesting, yeah. Give us some more details. Ring back tomorrow, we're going to have a chat. And I thought, oh, great, fantastic. My God, BBC News, they're going to cover it maybe. Who knows? Keep my fingers crossed. I rang back the next day and the guy went, oh, yeah, Bilderberg's been taken off our schedule. And I went, sorry, what? And he went, yes, Bilderberg's been taken off our schedule. Yes, sorry, it wasn't my decision. And it was really, he said it in quite an odd way, like this kind of slightly odd thing had happened. And that was the only time I felt, oh, right, okay, maybe a word has been passed down the chain. And it was, it's a controllable bit of the BBC. It's the TV news, it's the big thing. So I can imagine that's a point where pressure can be applied from above. I think they find it slightly harder to apply pressure across the board because, particularly with the internet, there's just too much being said in too many different formats, too many TV programs with multi-platform existences, and how do you shut down, how do you control the website associated with a TV program or the Twitter feed of a newspaper, and et cetera, et cetera. It becomes an almost impossible task for them. And I think what happened in 2010 is that the story of Bilderberg kind of got out of their control, and you could feel them losing it. You could sort of feel them losing their grip on the story. And it started breaking, and it started being talked about. And it was so different from 2009, where there was nothing. Suddenly it was in the news. It was in newspapers, proper newspaper. You know, it was a page in the Independent. It was, you know, we got a thing I wrote went into the Guardian newspaper on a Saturday, and it was, you know, BBC World Service, Radio 4, Russia Today, who have their own agenda, God only knows, but you know, they were there covering it. And you looked out around at the gates of the, well, not the gates, a kilometre away from the gates where the police line was drawn, and you looked and you saw TV cameras and you saw journalists, and you went, okay, wow, this is being talked about, and that was very refreshing, and the feeling was, you know, maybe they're losing their touch, maybe the lid has come off a little, maybe. But perhaps the most important reason why people should be concerned about Bilderberg is the presence of elected officials at a secret meeting, or secretive, perhaps you'd call it, a secret meeting with heads of banks, heads of corporations, and they don't talk about what was discussed. They barely talk about them being there at all, or simply deny it. And what's going on here? You know, that is not a democratic process, and I don't trust the list of names. When you see the list of names, that I don't believe that that what's being discussed at Bilderberg is in my best interests. I'd like to be able to believe that of people, but I don't. I really don't. In the last few years, one of the things that Europe has noticed most of all is the austerity measures that are being put into place. You've seen Greece most notably, but it's happening all around. It's happening in Britain right now, and those are austerity measures which you know have been discussed at Bilderberg. You look at who's there and you go, okay, well, this is something that is affecting my life. These discussions are about the world. They are about me. They're about money. They're about, you mean, even the agenda that has been published online. You look at the Bilderberg agenda, and it's about the world. It's about the real world. Everything from global cooling, as they call it, whatever that might be, through to, you know, the various financial crises, you know, the holding together of the European Union. All of these things affect everyone in their day-to-day life. I mean, obviously, in our day-to-day life, we have a lot of other things to think about, like the X factor, important things, and you know, our mortgages and our jobs, etc., etc., etc. But it would be a good idea for people to spend a little bit more time just glancing across at Bilderberg and going, now I wonder what they're talking about, because it's quite possibly extremely important.
If you was able to address Bilderberg, what would you tell them?
If I was able to address Bilderberg, well, hopefully that would be in my position as CEO of Coca-Cola. So I've obviously had a bit of a promotion. No, if I could, address Bilderberg, what would I say? I think if I could say anything to the architects or would-be architects of an ever more closely knitted together world, a world which feels ever more uniform, ever more united behind a single set of thoughts, a single currency in use, a single, further down the line, a single religion perhaps. This singularity of thought, a singularity of governance, global governance, I find it crushing. I think it is uncreative. I think that it is deadening. And I think that as soon as you push everything into a singularity and take away difference and take away traditions and cultures and ways of thought that are contrary to a single purpose, and you force people together and you create this one system, then you're creating a dead world, because in unity is nothing. It's only when you have two things rubbing up against each other, in nature, in anything, in life, in creativity. It's how you write a joke. You put one thing and you make something jar across it. You know, there's no, just setups alone aren't funny. You know, single things are dull, boring. Single worlds are boring. Single governments are boring. It's a boring world. I'd tell them to respect, I would ask them to perhaps pay a bit more attention to difference and to multiplicity and to respect that in life and in humankind, because I think it's a thing we're going to lose.